Library east of Birch Run. And so it's been a lot of fun to do this. It's been a lot of fun to talk about the book. And so again, thank you for coming. So tonight we're going to talk about rocks in Michigan and why Michigan rocks. I know, great title, right? So, yes.
Where is Hudson?
Okay. How many of you have ever heard of the website mindat.org? Lonely, isn't it? So mindat.org is I'll just say it is an excellent resource if you're into minerals. It's a mineralogical database, and you can go on here if you have a mineral that you don't know what it is, or you want to look up a locality somewhere, you go into Mindat, you go into the search, you type in your mineral name or your locality, and it'll bring up probably more information than you want to know about that site or about that mineral. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, and its parent, basically its parent company or parent organization is the Hudson Institute of Mineralogy, of which I am one of the directors on their board. I'm also a manager on Mindat and one of the Michigan experts as well on there. So wonderful site to visit. So, but tonight we're not going to talk about websites. We're going to talk about something that you can actually hold in your hand and read, and not have to go find a Wi-Fi connection or find a cell tower someplace to read about. So we're going to look at this book. We're going to examine the geology of the Great Lakes State just briefly. And I've already had a few people comment, oh, that looks like a picture of rocks. And you're on. But it is in the UP, and it is part of this presentation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So just some presentation topics. Basically, why did I do it, or why was there a need for this book? Why I chose the localities I did. Kind of go through a little bit of the writing process, kind of the do's and don'ts and the reasons why I did things and why I didn't do other things. And then just putting everything together, which is a daunting task amongst itself. And I can't get through a presentation about my book without a shameless plug at the end. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So how did this book come about? So the publisher is a company called Mountain Press. They're out of Missoula, Montana, and they're famous for their roadside geology series. But in 2010, they started another series called the State Rocks series. That series basically is going to look at all 50 states, and eventually they will have a book like Michigan Rocks for all 50 states, including Rhode Island, which will probably end up being about 2 pages long. Actually, I think they're going to combine Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts into one book, which makes sense. So I was at a geologic conference, and I saw the first couple books in this series. First one was California, second book was Arizona. And I talked to the publishers, and I said, hey, is anyone doing one for Michigan? And they said, no, would you like to do one for Michigan? And I said, yes. So in 2015, I got the contract and started writing the book. Now, being from Michigan, being born and raised in Michigan, one would think that because of that, I would know a lot about this state. I do, but there were places in this state that I'd heard of but never been to. Or there are some places that I've never even heard of. And I just turned half a century old this past January. So to be that age and not know something about the geology of the state, pretty impressive. So I began writing 2016. I was making great progress, traveling up here, driving around, getting photos, talking to people. And then in 2017, we basically had 3 things that happened to us. My wife, me and my wife, I live just outside of Houston, Texas right now. And so early, I don't know if I quite know that. It has its good and bad things. So first thing that happened was my mother-in-law passed away from cancer, long battle with cancer. Right after that, I switched jobs. I used to be a criminal investigator for environmental crimes in the state of Texas. Switched jobs, now I'm a professor of earth science. But the real big thing was that later that year, we got a hurricane named Harvey. that dropped over 40 inches of rain in our house in about a 5-day period. So it really slowed us down for a while. Luckily, by 2018, we're back at it again, making great progress. 2019, I made 2 separate trips to Michigan from Texas to gather photos and gather more information. And then 2020 happened. Need I say more than that? Which made travel almost impossible for basically 2 years. But then by 2022, I got back at it again, got to finish my photos, put the finishing touches on the book, basically went through one series of corrections from the publisher. And then by 2023, on April 15th, the book was published, came out. Surprisingly, in the first printing, they printed it between 8,000 and 10,000 copies and sold them all. So it's already in its second printing, just a little over a year later. So the book is far exceeding my expectations of what I thought it would be. And one of the reasons originally why I did the book was because there had not been a book solely on Michigan geology written since the early 1970s. It's been about 50 years. There's lots of books out there on finding Lake Superior agates, finding Petoskey stones, finding beach rocks, looking at the Great Lakes as a whole in the geology, but nothing specific to Michigan. That's why I wrote this book. Okay? So for those, who has the book, by the way, already? Oh my goodness. There's 2 boxes sitting there. I'm not going to say that. There's 2 boxes sitting there with books. So the book is basically broken down into 4 regions across the state based on its geology. So we basically have the Northwest UP, the Central Southwest, Eastern, and all of Lower. Now, writing this book, there were a couple issues that I ran into. As a geologist, I do a lot of work also out west, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, basically 4 corners area. Michigan has a problem that those 4 states don't. And that is all this green stuff around here covering up everything. So many of the outcrops in Michigan are covered by trees and plants and grasses and what have you. So it makes it a little more difficult to actually see the rocks and see the outcrops. The other problem in the state of Michigan is that we had glaciers. Glaciers like to dump things around and leave lots of sand in places, burying outcrops again. So that's why you don't see a lot of little stars here in lower Michigan, because most of it's covered up by glacial sand. Now, those glaciers also created a lot of landforms, which we'll see later on in the presentation. So when I chose sites for the book, I wanted sites that were easily accessible. I wanted sites where you could actually take a passenger car and drive to them, get out of your car with the book, and look at what you're seeing and read about what you're seeing. I also wanted ones that were easily viewed. In other words, ones that weren't in amongst a bunch of trees or covered up by stuff. Again, I wanted it to be very easily viewed. I wanted sites that gave a good variety, because Michigan has one of the most varied geologies of any state in the country. As I say in the book, you can basically be standing on 3.5 billion year old rock and take one step over, and now you're on sediments that are 8,000 years old. So an incredible array of geology. I also had sites where you get a twofer. Basically, you get 2 geologic processes in one stop going on. We'll see some of those here in a moment. So let's start in the far northwestern part of Michigan, basically the Upper Peninsula down to about Ironwood. And here, this is dominated by something called the mid-continent rift. A rift is where you basically have a volcanic eruption where you're actually splitting apart a continent or splitting apart plates. And that's what happened here about 1.1 billion years ago. North America almost got split in half by this rift, by these volcanic eruptions. But because of those eruptions, we also have the native copper deposits all up and down this peninsula here. Now I write stratovolcano, question mark. So when I say stratovolcano, what comes to mind for most people? Big volcano, something like Mount Rainier, or Mount Shasta, or even Mount St. Helens. It's thought that one of these was also in Michigan, about a billion years ago. There's also a peculiar outlier. I'm trying to say that 5 times fast, right? But there is one of these in this section as well. And the one nice thing about this region is that there are numerous accessible outcrops. So numerous places you can see the rocks without them being covered up. In this area, I include 14 stops. So the first place we're going to go to the Greenstone Flow. How many of you have ever been to the Upper Peninsula? So if you're driving north from Calumet and you come down a hill, there's a hill on 41, you come down towards Amite and Mohawk. That's probably one of the first things you see is this huge ridge off in the distance. That is the Greenstone Flow. That is one lava flow from those series of volcanic eruptions. It is said that the Greenstone Flow is not only the thickest lava flow on Earth at approximately 16 to 1,800 meters thick, it's also one of the largest in area. And so research has been done to look at that Greenstone Flow, that volcanic flow, and it dips this way towards Lake Superior, goes underneath Lake Superior, and pops out on Isle Royale, 70 miles away. Just to give you an idea of how large this one single lava flow is. The spine, and you can kind of even see it right there, this high ridge right here. That is the Greenstone Flow on Isle Royale. It's been chemically fingerprinted to be exactly that flow right there. So an impressive flow. We go to the Porcupine Mountains a little bit further south. And here you have a lot of the same rocks. You have lavas or basalts. You have the conglomerates from same as up in the Keweenaw. But down here you have another rock type. You can kind of see it, this one here a little bit. You can see it in. Kind of a lighter colored rock. That is a rock called rhyolite. It's a very high silica volcanic flow. Rifts don't produce but very little rhyolites. But in this area, we see huge flows of rhyolites. And rhyolites typically come from one kind of situation, stratovolcanoes. That's what makes geologists believe that about 1 billion years ago, there was a volcano, a large volcano, just kind of back off in here somewhere, they think. Now granted, you can't see it today. Billion years of erosion, it's gone. But we know something like that had to be there because of those rhyolite flows, those high silica lava flows that were there. East of Copper Harbor is Horseshoe Harbor. This is one of the ones where you basically have to park your car and take about a 10 or so minute walk through the woods to get to Lake Superior. But once you're there, you see this huge ridge here. Along the base of this ridge here are these whitish mounds that pop up. Those are stromatolites that are preserved. This rock is just over 1 billion years old, so what this tells us is that there had to be life on Earth over 1 billion years ago. These are created from a blue-green algae that still lives today. In fact, there are stromatolites in Western Australia that have been dated back over 3 billion years. So these are a very successful life form. You can actually go to Western Australia today at Shark Bay and actually see living stromatolites as well. If any of you have ever watched Discovery Channel or any of the science channels, every once in a while you'll see when they go out to Shark Bay, you can see them there actually still alive, still living today. This is one of those twofer stops I was talking about. So this is at the Presque Isle River, the far western end of Porcupine Mountain State Park. And the Presque Isle River flows through the park and exits out to Lake Superior. So what we're seeing here are rocks again that are about 1 billion years old. This is the Nunsuck Shale, which is actually not a shale, but a very fine-grained sandstone. But in this Nunsuck, you see these holes here, all scattered along the river here. Those are potholes. Those are actually modern recent geologic forces happening. And one thing I do want to mention is that in the book, where I try to illustrate a point about how something forms, you'll see these gray diagrams here, explaining to you how, in this case, how these potholes form. And there's still potholes not only here, but anywhere in the world. This is how they form. Here, you can actually thank my wife for these images. She's more of a graphic artist than I am. I'm a good photographer. So I mentioned about a peculiar outlier. This is it. This is Limestone Mountain in the southern part of Houghton County near a little town called Pelkey, west of Lawrence, America. Peculiar because this is all carbonate. This is limestone and dolomite. And this particular hill or mountain and Sherman Hill, about 2 miles to the northeast, sit on almost 1 billion year old sandstone. These are about 400 million years old. So what's going on here? We know that a warm, shallow sea covered that part of Michigan, and actually all of the Great Lakes, or before the Great Lakes were here. But as those seas receded, and I should have said that, limestones formed from precipitation out of seawater. Basically, plankton and diatoms and things like that. They die, settle to the bottom, and basically turn into limestone or dolomite or some sort of carbonate. What's interesting is that this limestone, again, only appears in this area, and the closest equivalent is about 150 miles to the southeast, east-southeast. So what happened here? Why didn't the glaciers rip this apart like it did every other limestone around the area? You can figure that question out, you'd be famous. Because there are scientists today that are still trying to figure out and hypothesize why Limestone Mountain is there. For over a century, scientists have been trying to figure out why that is there.
What age is that?
So this is about 400 million. The sandstones that it's sitting on
So
are,
that'd be like Orbition or?
yeah, about. So the sandstones that they're sitting on is Jacobsville sandstone, about 960. Okay, so that's what makes it peculiar, is that here's this outlier that really shouldn't be there. Okay, so let's now move on to the central and southwest, and here we see the oldest rocks in Michigan in this area. We also see the highest point in Michigan, here at Mount Arvin. Lots of unique, and I'll just say bizarre rocks are in this region right here. And for this region, I included 11 stops, pretty varied, different features here. It tells different stories. One of the stops I put in here was the Watersmeet Gneiss, or Watersmeet Dome. This sits about 4.5 miles north of the US 45, US 2 intersection in Watersmeet. And what makes these rocks so unique is that these are the oldest rocks in Michigan, dated to almost 3.6 billion years old. Earth itself is about 4.5 billion. So 3/4 of Earth history, these have been on the planet. There's actually a sample right there. This is a sample of them. So later on after the presentation, you can actually touch a 3.5 billion year old rock. It's thought that these rocks are now gneiss is a metamorphic rock. So it didn't start out life like this. It's thought that this started out life as a dacite, which is a volcanic product. And over time, this got metamorphosed. You can actually see some of the banding in here. So it's a very nice gneiss. Excellent example of a gneiss. Founders Landing Park, this is in Marquette. And this again is another twofer. So what you see here are these kind of blobby looking rocks here. If you've ever watched, and again, our science program on Hawaii, and they show the underwater volcanic eruptions where it's kind of like, the lava is kind of like going out. That's what these are. These are called pillow basalts. These tell us that these lavas and these rocks had to have erupted underwater. What makes these unique is that these are about 2.7 billion years old. So it tells us that there was liquid water on Earth at that time. It's thought that there was been liquid water on Earth much, much earlier than this, recent research. You see them up here too, these kind of blobbish areas here. Now what makes this a twofer is that if you go there, this is Lake Superior right here, you can actually see scratches. You kind of, there's one right there you can see. A couple up here as well, and there's a couple coming this way as well. Those scratches are the result of glaciers scraping against that rock, polishing it, but also that ice carries a lot of rock, a lot of soil in it, that when it moves across that rock, it creates scratches. And so we can tell what direction those glaciers came from. The other thing about geologists is that we always like scale in our photos. So you see an official scale here, and here a geologist for scale. That's actually my wife. So doing her best Vanna White impersonation, looking at geology. Just up the road is a place called Presque Isle Park. Beautiful park, north of Marquette. Very quiet, very peaceful, lots of wildlife out there. But one of the famous places is this kind of blackish, greenish rock here called black rocks. Many tourists likes to jump off these rocks into the deep water of Lake Superior, about 40-degree water. So I haven't done it either. So, but then again, I swim like a rock. So, but I'll watch and point and laugh. But what makes these rocks so special is that these are a rock called peridotite. Peridotite forms in Earth's mantle. So these are very deep forming rocks, and it's thought that these rocks were brought to the surface when two continents collided back about 2.5 billion years ago. And because of that subduction, because of that accretion, these rocks got brought to the surface. Just down the road there, up at North Point, I think is what it's called. Here we see, here's our peritites again, a little bit lighter, but here we see sandstone. So this is about 2.5, 2.6 billion years old. This is only 960 million. So we're missing, there's a gap here. We're missing a lot of time there. If you look closely, you can even see an erosional surface in here showing that this was exposed at Earth's surface. And so this is something that geologists call an unconformity. And in fact, this one is called the Great Unconformity because we can see this unconformity all over the world. I've seen it at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I've seen it in Montana, Wisconsin, Canada, Norway, Scotland. It occurs all across Earth. So at that time, there had to be a lot of erosion going on. Some geologists even call that period the boring billion. I don't think it's boring, but some geologists do. Jasper Knob. So if you've ever been around the Isthmian area near Marquette, there's this huge knob of banded iron formation. That's what we're seeing here and here. Banded iron formations tell us that there was a major change in the atmosphere of Earth. One where we went from an atmosphere that was anoxic or oxygen poor to one that became oxygen rich. And this happened, this is called the Great Oxidation Event, and it occurred between about 2.4 and about 1.85 billion years ago. These are some of the last banded iron formations to have formed during that period. Again, another beautiful area to visit. I wouldn't recommend going up there during a thunderstorm though, because you're dealing with a knob, a mountain of solid iron. Lightning likes iron, so please don't go up there when there's a thunderstorm. Republic outcrops, now here we actually have a threefer. So a little added bonus. So around the town of Republic, which is on US or State Highway 95, you have this kind of whitish, white and gray rock here. This is a rock called migmatite. Migmatite is a very high pressure, high temperature, very high grade metamorphic rock. It's even more of a grade higher than a gneiss. These rocks almost melt. And they actually become kind of mushy, kind of like taffy almost, but they don't completely melt. And so when you look at this outcrop, you can see white and black swirls and just all different patterns going through it. A little bit further south, you see this formation. This kind of wiggly almost looks like sausage, doesn't it? In fact, it's called boudinage, which is French for sausage. And so what's happened here, you had some softer rocks here, you have very hard rock type in here. This basically was subjected to such high temperatures and pressures that it started stretching that harder rock, that more competent rock, to the point where it started breaking off here and started making these basically sausage links in that rock. Just down the road a little further, about 2 miles south of this outcrop, we have this outcrop. And in this one outcrop, this one picture here, there is a lot going on. You have a granite that is about 2.6 and 2.7 billion. And I don't know if you can see the picture, but right about there is a light colored little layer called a dike. That's about 1.8 billion years old. Here we have a couple of darker rocks. These are associated with that rifting event. The basalt of the Keweenaw at about 1.1 billion. So we have a lot going on in that rock. There's even more stuff in that rock if you really, really examine it very well. Even got some post-glacial hominid activity going on there with the graffiti going on. Canyon Falls, beautiful waterfall south of Lance, but there's a huge misnomer here. A lot of tourist writers and a lot of bloggers like to say, oh, this is slate because it's flat line and broken like this. They're not geologists, and they're wrong. If you examine this rock closely, it's actually a quartzite, equivalent to some of the quartzites around Marquette. So again, beautiful. Again, take a look at the rocks. And one thing that one of my geology professors always told me was, never tell the rock what they are. Let the rock tell you what they are. And that's a classic case with Canyon Falls. Now, I said there were also some very bizarre rocks up there. Things that just really don't fit. And in a belt between about Crystal Falls eastwards and near Escanaba are these weird little cone shapes, these weird little rock types up there. These are kimberlites. Most people know that kimberlites you can find diamonds in. And so there's a series of these little outcrops all along that belt. But north of Crystal Falls, at a place called Lake Ellen, is the best place to observe one of these. So here's the rock, here's the top of this kimberlite, and you can see just how jumbled up it is here. Not really a competent rock. Kimberlites form in the mantle. In fact, they form almost at the core mantle interface. And no one really knows for sure why they erupt, but when they do, they can reach and go from basically the core mantle to the Earth's surface in a matter of hours. They are fast moving. And when they come to the surface, they basically just explode, and that's it. They're basically a one-and-done eruption. And so what you're seeing here is all this debris here that got blasted out of this one little volcanic eruption here. Now, there is a misnomer about kimberlites. Diamonds do not form in kimberlites. Diamonds form in the mantle. And so what happens is these diamonds, and it's got to be the right temperature, the right pressure, almost like a Goldilocks situation. And what happens is as these kimberlites, these explosive eruptions come to Earth's surface, they pick up diamonds in the mantle and bring them to the surface. So not all kimberlites are going to have diamonds in them. In fact, some of the associated ones with Lake Ellen do not have any diamonds in them whatsoever. Does Lake Ellen have diamonds in it? Yes, they did find a few, but they were microscopic and basically sub-economic. So sorry, ladies, you're not going to have a Michigan diamond in your ring or your earrings. It's not going to happen. But again, they do some kimberlites, like what they're named for, Kimberley, South Africa, has lots of diamonds in them. All right, so now let's move to the eastern Upper Peninsula. So we're working our way, we're kind of getting away from what I think is the best part of Michigan, and we're kind of working our way down to the south, east, and a little more south. I know, but I'm precious. I'm from the Keweenaw, so I'm precious. So this is where you see the first outer rings of something called the Michigan Basin. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the lower Michigan section. These are also the oldest rocks of the Michigan Basin. Most of these are sedimentary, so things like carbonates, sandstones, mudstones, things like that, are what you find in the Michigan Basin. Lots of glacial features now we're starting to see in the eastern Upper Michigan as well. And here, managed to get 11 stops out of this area. So for people that said, oh, that's pictured rocks, well, now you have your answer. This is actually the Niagara Escarpment at Fayette on the Garden Peninsula. And the Niagara Escarpment is extremely interesting in the fact that, as I said, this Michigan Basin here is kind of like a bullseye, almost like a bowl shape here. Right in the very center, it actually dips down. We'll talk more about that here in a second. But what's interesting about the Niagara Escarpment is that it starts basically where it's exposed. It's out of southern central Wisconsin, works its way up through Green Bay, up the Door Peninsula, up to the Garden Peninsula, where this photo was taken, kind of arches around the southern UP, across Drummond Island, Manitoulin Island, onto the Bruce Peninsula. There's a couple little squiggly things here in Ontario. Comes further south, makes a hard left hook at Hamilton, and ends up here at the Niagara River. What's the Niagara River famous for? The falls. The falls flow over this escarpment, same rock type, and then continues a little bit further east to near Rochester, New York. So the same rocks that we see here in the Garden Peninsula and up and near Manistee, these rocks here are the same ones that Niagara Falls flows over. So very incredible distance. Now, another feature in the UP, lesser known, is called the Cambrian Escarpment. Cambrian for the age. So you're looking at sandstones and dolomites that are around 500, 480 million years old. And I'm sure most of you have been to Niagara, Niagara too, but the Commandant Falls, and you notice something very strange about these falls. Upper Falls is just one spectacular waterfall. Lower Falls, almost like a series of rapids or a stair-step pattern. Well, why is that? It has to do with the rock types and the geology that are there. So here we have what's called the Munising Formation. Munising Formation includes Autrain Formation, Myers Castle Sandstone, and Chapel Rock Sandstone. And so here at Upper Falls, we see the water comes over this Autrain Formation, which is a dolomite, a very hard dolomite, which acts as a cap on the sandstones. Comes across Myers Sandstone, and then comes into the Chapel Rock Sandstone. The Myers Castle Sandstone is very cemented, so very hard to erode. Chapel Rock Sandstone, on the other hand, is not very well cemented and easily breaks apart. So what you're seeing here at Upper Falls, you have the Chapel Rock, and it passes by the Myers Castle and ends up at the Chapel Rock down here. River keeps flowing along, gets lower to Commandant Falls, it has no cap rock. So that sandstone has no protection. So it just easily crumbles away. That's why you get this stair-step pattern here in Lower Falls that you don't get in the Upper Falls. Here's pictured rocks in the famous Indian Head. Now, the reason why pictured rocks are named pictured rocks is that just back this way from Indian Head is a spectacular wall with all the different colors of staining on those rocks. That picture is actually in the book. I do have a picture of it. But another thing that's unique about pictured rocks is these sand dunes, the Grand Sable Dunes near Grand Marais, which are a separate stop in the book, but they are part of Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. And I include this tree trunk here. And I've had people say, well, why are you showing tree trunks in your book? This area is known as the Ghost Forest. And so what happened here is there was a huge forest here at one time, about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, that over time, these dunes overtook it and buried it, thus killing the trees. So when you go there, on occasion, you can see these trunks and other stumps that get exposed. However, if you go there and you see these trunks and stumps, get a picture of it. Because you may go there next year and they might be gone. They may be buried. In fact, that's actually what happened here. This is an old picture. I took this picture long before I even thought of the book coming out. Because when I was writing the book, these trees were gone. They were buried out there. And then that happens periodically where they get buried, they get exposed, they get buried, they get exposed, back and forth. I think right after I wrote the book and published it, the trees popped out again. So, just my luck, right? Mackinac Island. I think I described this in the book as the jewel of the Great Lakes. You gotta go there for fudge, right? You have to. But it's also very interesting geologically. And so we have Arch Rock, we have Sugarloaf. So if you drive across Mackinac Bridge and you look at Mackinac Island, one thing you'll notice is kind of almost like a stair-step pattern, how it comes up. Again, there's a picture of it in the book. Sugarloaf here sits high above current Lake Huron. But Sugarloaf is a lake stack or a sea stack that can only form on a lakeshore. This sits about 300, almost 400 feet above Lake Huron today. So what's going on here? Well, we know the Great Lakes aren't the Great Lakes of old. Their levels have fluctuated up and down for thousands of years since the glaciers receded. And at that time, the shoreline probably would have been right down here someplace to make a sea stack or a lake stack. And so in this stage here, we call the Algonquin stage, about 12 to 14,000 years ago. About 5,500 years ago, the lake stand was a little bit lower, called the Nipissing stage, and that formed Arch Rock. Arch Rock, again, sits high above Lake Huron today, but this formed along the lakeshore. We notice because we can see evidence of water lapping up against the base of Arch Rock. So very much history going on here for these two sites. Drummond Island also has some very interesting geology. In fact, it has one of only maybe a handful of features called an albar. Albar is where you have basically a flat, scraped off bedrock without much growing on it. And that's what we see here. This is an albar. Typically, they only form in higher latitudes. And so you walk out here and you can actually see limestone bedrock with scratches, glacial scratches all over it. And today, you don't see but just a few grasses growing on this. And that's really all it can grow on. Now, from the Maxton Plains, which is where this is, you can take a drive to some place called the Fossil Ledges. And this is one of those places where I recommend you do not take a passenger car to. Matter of fact, I don't even recommend taking a high clearance vehicle there. I basically say, if you go out there, take a four-wheel drive, because there are some nasty mud holes out there on that road to get out there. And just from Maxton to here, it's about 6 miles, and it can take over an hour to get there, just to walk through there. But once you do get back there, this entire area is nothing but fossils on there, which tells us that this was probably a reef, probably around the Cambrian, maybe the early Ordovician time. Now it's called fossil ledges because you can kind of see this almost stair-step pattern here again, and you can walk out here. It's probably about a little over ankle deep. Here it's about waist deep or so. Here it's over 100 feet of water. So right at this edge right here, it is a sheer cliff right there. So Unless you're a good swimmer, please don't go out there. And I gotta say that even though I do say that you should have a high clearance or four-wheel drive vehicle to go out there, I have a Jeep Wrangler, made it out there with no trouble. On the way back out, we actually saw someone in a BMW 3 Series car headed out here. So I don't know if it's a testament to how tough BMWs are, or whether they were maybe shooting a commercial or something out there, but I know I wouldn't do it, because we were going through water about yay deep to get out there. So we didn't stick around to see if they made it back up. So now let's go to the Lower Peninsula. And again, this is dominated by that Michigan Basin, this kind of bowl-shaped depression here. Here we have a cross section. So we drew a line from about where we are right now down to near Detroit, and then flipped it on its side. This is what the rocks would look like. So you see this huge depression here. These are all sedimentary rocks here. So things like sandstones, limestones, dolomites, mudstone, things like that. Here we see this PC, that stands for Precambrian. So these are the old basement rocks that we see in the western UP, in central UP. Because there's so many sediments here, it's actually warped downward those that earlier basement here. And so here again, we're down by the Michigan Basin. We see a lot of glacial features, which is a blessing and a curse. We see a lot of the glacial features from the glaciers, but those same glaciers dropped off all that sand and all that sediment, and it covers up everything. So that's why we don't see a lot of stops in this area, mostly around the edges here, because it just covers everything up. However, one place where we do see phenomenal outcrops are the Grand Ledges, west of Grand Rapids. And so here we see sandstones. These are the actual Grand Ledges, but nearby is a place called the American Vitrified Quarry. And you can walk there, and here we see much different rocks. Geologists call this a cyclothem, because what we see here is evidence of falling sea levels. So here we have sandstones, probably some sort of a beach sediment out here. And what this is interpreted as is basically a barrier island, much like what we see along the Gulf Coast and along the eastern seaboard, and a back lagoon behind it, because we see these sandstones, and we kind of get into some more mudstones, some finer grain stuff. This is coal. The only place coal can form is where we've had a lot of trees and a lot of vegetation that gets buried and forms this coal. Now, we see coal here, and then all of a sudden up here now we see more sandstones and lots of sandstones up here. And so what's been interpreted, again, here's our beach, here's our lagoon. Here we believe some sort of a major storm, whether a tropical storm or a hurricane, may have hit this area and buried all of this with feet, tens of feet of sandstones here. So not too far from here is the Little Akiak River between Onaway and Rogers City along State Highway 68, just about halfway between actually. And in that part of northeast Michigan, we have a lot of what's called karst topography. Karst topography forms where you have limestones that get eroded from underneath by groundwater, the action of groundwater. And so at this stop at the Little Akiak River, you can kind of trace the river as it flows along the surface here. It just disappears. It ends. You can walk about 250, 300 meters. As you're walking along, you can hear water under your feet, but you can't see it. Where you park here to see all of this, here's the Little Akiak River again, it pops out again. So what's happening here, our river's flowing along, finds one of these caves that's exposed at the surface, drops down into it, and it flows underground until it reaches a little cave here or a little outlet and keeps flowing along. And that's what we see here. Sleeping Bear Dunes, this is another glacial feature. So in this location, you have two different types of dunes. Here you have a beach dune, down here at the bottom, down at the lakeshore, with lots and lots of sand. This here is a glacial moraine, basically the end point of a glacier. As a glacier is moving along, it's scraping up and basically mounding up sediments and rock and whatever. And then once it recedes, it leaves that big mound there, almost like a bulldozer of sorts. And so we see beach sand here, but because the prevailing winds come off Lake Michigan, it can take that sand, blow it up this bank, and deposit them up here in a dune called a perch dune. Basically a dune perched on top of that moraine. The famous dune climb here, I'm guilty of climbing it. I'm sure many of you have as well. But in the 40 or so years that I've been going there, this dune is actually on the move. It's actually moving towards the camera, towards where I took this picture, the parking lot. Because I remember trees along here that either don't exist anymore or are almost completely buried because of this sand. So this whole dune is actually migrating to the east. Leelanau Drumlin Field. So here we see actual glacier features again. This is a drumlin. Drumlins form as glaciers move. They move along. And what's nice about drumlins is that we can tell what direction the glacier came from. You see this feature here on the side, where you have your steep side. That is where the glacier came from. So in this drumlin here, the ice flow would have been from left to right with this nice streamlined shape here. Now this particular drumlin here is just south of Leland. It's about it's less than 1,000 feet off the road, main road. Here's another drumlin, but this one is taken from about 7 or 8 miles away. So you can see just how big these drumlins can get. There's one here, there's another little small one right here as well. And another little small one here. Typically, drumlins, I like to say, come in herds. Because when you find one, you'll find several. And so there's several good ones to see on the Leelanau Peninsula. But you can also drive just south of here, towards Elk Rapids along US 31, and you'll see drumlins. You can go to near Posen on the eastern side of the Lower Peninsula and see them. And you can also see a few drumlins near the town of Powers, which is west of Escanaba as well. And then all down through Menominee County, you can see drumlins as well. Camel Lake, this is near Grayling. I was actually just there today looking around. This is an example of a kettle lake. Kettle lakes form where you have a receding or melting glacier that basically leaves an orphaned block of ice behind. And it also, as that glacier is receding and melting, you get a lot of glacial outwash, a lot of glacial sediment. As that melting glacier moves further back, more sediments form, or more sediments come off, eventually burying that ice block within those sediments. Over time, that orphan block melts, water fills that depression, and then forms a kettle lake. Now, one thing interesting about kettle lakes is that they can be a very, very variable size. That is great grammar. But this particular lake here is almost perfectly round. It's about 4 or so acres in size, almost 30 feet deep in the middle. So they have very steep sides. Also, kettles don't necessarily have to form lakes. At Yankee Springs State Recreation Area in the southwest part of Lower Michigan, there is a depression here called the Devil's Soup Bowl. It's in the book. But it has no water in it. And so what thought there happened is that there was an ice block there, it melted, but the glacier so disrupted the bedrock under it that when it melted, it just drained out. So there's no lake there. But it is a kettle. We see a lot of glacial erratics. I mean, you can go anywhere, not only in Michigan, but in Wisconsin or anywhere there's been glaciers. And you can look out in the field, you just see a random rock or boulder out in the middle of the field that probably doesn't belong there. most of those are granites and gneisses from Canada, sitting on carbonates, limestones. So they certainly do not belong there. This big block here, with the geologist for scale again, you always gotta have scale. This is in Wilderness State Park. You can actually drive right up to it. You can get on your car and just like take about 10 steps and you're up to it. But this is a rock known as Engadine limestone. Engadine limestone forms in the UP, near the town of Engadine. This is in the Lower Peninsula. And so obviously somebody did come in with their pickup truck and haul it down there. Glacier moved this down there. Now glaciers, on the other hand, they also do bring us phenomenal rocks. The pudding stones that we find all over northern Lower Michigan. Those come from a few outcrops north of Bruce Mines in Ontario. In fact, guy that I just, him and his wife, I just spent the night with him last night, and we were discussing geology. He actually went and found that outcrop where they come from. And so I recommend watching his video. And in case you're wondering, his YouTube channel is named Michigan Rocks. No relation. But they also bring things like this. This is a Golgotha tillite. A tillite is basically a glacially formed rock. Basically, this is the material you find within a drumlet many times. I say glacially tillite. These two rocks here are over 2 billion years old. So what that tells us is that over 2 billion years ago, about 2.2 to 2.4, there was a worldwide glaciation event that occurred on Earth to produce these rocks. The euperlites, everyone's crazy about euperlites right now. Those come from Canada. Those are also a glacial product. You're on the Lake Superior Beach and you see one of these rocks. That's an Omar. These come from Hudson Bay and came down. And so just fascinating what glaciers can bring. They can bring us soil, things that cover up things, but they can also bring us beautiful rocks. Actually, that pudding stone is sitting right there, by the way. One last stop in the Lower Peninsula that I want to look at here. This is the Hugh J. Gray Cairn. This is located north of Elk Rapids and a little bit north of the town of Kuwait. And there's nothing really geologic with this, but it's very interesting. In fact that in 1938, the State Highway Transportation Board decided that they put a call out to all 83 counties, the state of Michigan, and they said, provide us a rock from your county that exemplifies your county because we want to build this cairn. And so you can go there and you can see 82 rocks in that cairn. But I said there were 83 counties. One county did not provide a rock. That was Wexford County, where Cadillac is located, because they were a huge rubber manufacturing locality. They felt that rubber best exemplified their county, not a rock. So if you look on this cairn here on the back side, you'll see this big block of black rubber there with the name Wexford embossed across it. But it's an interesting place to look at. Right here, you see Houghton and Muskegon. These are both conglomerates. But you can walk around here and you can identify all the different rock types in that cairn. So it's fascinating just to understand, just look at what rocks form in what counties. Oh dear. I know I couldn't get through a talk without a shameless plug, right? So, but it is true, if you want to learn more about the geology, I just picked selected some interesting localities, but again, there's 56 stops in this book that you can go to a site and open up the book and it'll tell you what you're looking at. And so there's not much out there like that'll do that. Now, as I said at the beginning, Mountain Press has an entire series of these books. And so you can get all these different states right now, and Death Valley. They just published this one about a month ago, strictly for Death Valley. But you can get things like Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio. You can get some of the western states. New Mexico rocks, that's one that my wife did. So she wrote that book with my photos in it. And so they're just, I mean, they're a labor of love, they're a lot of fun. We're currently working on, or I should say she's working on Texas rocks right now. And just about ready to go, come out and press the publisher, and then I'm working on a full color revision of Roadside Geology of Texas. Both of those should be published and available by October of next year. And I got a feeling that they're going to give my wife Utah to do Utah rocks because she spent a lot of time in Utah as a kid. And so she knows Utah very well as well. So that's about all I have right now. I do have a parting slide, and I like to part with the fact that when most people see a rainbow, what do you associate at the end of a rainbow? A pot of gold. I say that's incorrect. Being from the Upper Peninsula, I say that there's a copper mine at the end of the rainbow. In fact, there's two of them here. So these are both the engine houses for the big steam hoists there. And so with that, I want to say thank you. You've been a great crowd. And so I thank you very much for coming. I need a drink before I lose my voice. And so if you have any questions?
What about all the salt mines under the city of Detroit?
So I wanted to include those in the book, but I could never get access to them. And I've been to them, but not for this project. Years ago, we were there on a college field trip. And we got underground, I got tour of it, but I could never get back in there to get photos for this book. Now, I'd love to put the salt mines in there because they're fascinating too. But we just couldn't do it.
So geologically, how did they form?
The salts?
Yeah.
It's basically that goes into that inland sea. So when the Michigan Basin was forming, there was a huge inland sea here as well. Very warm, very shallow. And you get, just like today at Death Valley, you go to Death Valley, you can actually watch salt being formed in Badwater Basin right now. Same process probably happened about 300, 350 million years ago, where you basically have that stagnant seawater. It's very salty, and eventually that salt's going to come out of solution, come out of the water.
Well, it's amazing that the Great Lakes are not salty because of it.
Yeah, but again, that's from glacial melt too.
Yeah.
And so,
But it never connected.
never connected though. So I do have some rocks up here. You can take a look at. Oldest, the youngest here. Oldest at 3.6. Youngest at about 350 million. So, and in those boxes are books. So I was told that I had to bring books tonight for people to purchase if they would like.
How much are they?
They list for 22. I sold them for 20 cash. And no tax, no shipping. Northwest. We live off Cypress. So, oh, okay.